Zombie Tiger. Right at the beginning of Army of the Dead, we're introduced to Martin, a cold, calculating executive who works for billionaire Bly Tanaka and accompanies a team of mercenaries on a mission inside a zombie-overrun Las Vegas. From the start, it's clear that Martin isn't there to help anyone. An undercover agent, he hides his true objective, obtaining the head of an alpha zombie, something Bly intends to use as a biological weapon and military asset. As the mission goes on and everything starts to fall apart, Martin finally reveals who he really is. At a crucial moment, after decapitating the Alpha Queen and believing he's completed his mission, he tries to leave the city carrying the head. However, Lily, a smuggler who lives and operates inside the quarantined Las Vegas, tricks him, swaps the head for a money-counting machine, and escapes. In a desperate attempt to flee the casino and reach the exit, Martin ends up facing something far worse than ordinary zombies. He crosses paths with Valentine, the zombie tiger kept as a kind of living weapon inside the city. This is the moment when fate brutally comes to collect its debt. The attack is neither quick nor merciful. The film makes a point of showing that Martin feels every second of what's happening. After using everyone around him as human shields, Martin ends exactly the way he treated others: the snakes. In Snakes on a Plane, the premise kicks off in pure chaos. A commercial flight crosses the Pacific carrying a key passenger set to testify against a crime boss. To stop the testimony, dozens of venomous snakes are released inside the plane, turning the cabin into a nightmare. Amid screams, panic, and unexpected attacks, passengers struggle to survive as the snakes take over the entire aircraft. In the middle of this chaos appears Paul, a selfish, desperate guy willing to do anything to save his own skin. When the snakes start getting closer, he makes a decision that changes everything. Without thinking twice, Paul yanks a small dog out of a passenger's arms and throws it as live bait, using the defenseless animal as a distraction. The act shocks everyone nearby and makes it clear he's crossed every moral line. For a few seconds, it seems like the plan worked. But what Paul doesn't realize is that in an environment ruled by instinct and venom, there's no room for cowardice without consequences. Right after his despicable act, a much larger snake approaches from behind. It coils around Paul, restrains him, and goes in for the final attack. Denied help. In The Shallows, we follow Nancy Adams, a young medical student who decides to travel alone to a remote beach in Mexico shortly after her mother's death. What begins as a journey of grief and personal connection quickly turns into a desperate fight for survival. Nancy is attacked by a massive great white shark and ends up stranded on a small rock in the middle of the ocean, injured, bleeding, and unable to swim back to shore. With the shark circling the area, Nancy becomes completely dependent on outside help. Every minute counts, and anyone who appears on the beach could mean salvation. When a man shows up on the sand, she gets excited, screams, and tries to get his attention, believing that someone can finally call for help for her. The hope doesn't last long. The man, visibly drunk, ignores her cries for help and decides to do exactly the opposite of what's expected. He rummages through Nancy's belongings left on the beach and steals her things, showing total indifference to her desperate situation. Then, seeing the surfboard, he decides to head into the water to use the gear, as if nothing were happening. The mistake is immediate and fatal. As soon as he enters the water, the same shark that has Nancy trapped attacks him without warning. The Bullies. In Let Me In, the story is set in the early 1980s and follows Owen, a 12-year-old boy who is isolated, neglected by his parents, and constantly humiliated at school. He lives in silence, bottling up his anger while suffering at the hands of Kenny and other older bullies who make sure to remind him daily of his weakness. Everything changes when Owen meets Abby, a strange girl who moves into the apartment next door, accompanied by a mysterious man. Owen and Abby form a quiet, almost secret bond. Over time, it becomes clear that Abby is not an ordinary child. She is a vampire dependent on blood to survive and trapped in a young body for decades. Even so, she shows genuine care for Owen, encouraging him to stand up for himself and promising to protect him from any threat.
And I'll help you. I'm a lot stronger than you think I am.
That promise is fulfilled in the most brutal way possible during a swimming class. Some bullies set up an ambush, distract the teacher, and force Owen underwater, counting the seconds as he struggles not to lose air. The terror is silent and suffocating, and suddenly this happens. Before Owen has to surface, the water turns into a massacre zone. Abby appears and attacks the aggressors. Arms are ripped off, bodies are thrown around, and muffled screams echo through the pool, making it clear the punishment is extreme. When Owen finally rises to the surface, he finds only blood, silence, and the certainty that he was never truly alone. The doll. In Megan, we follow the story of Katie, a girl who has just lost her parents in an accident and goes to live with her aunt Gemma, a brilliant but emotionally distant engineer. Trying to deal with her niece's grief and her own guilt, Gemma introduces Katie to a secret prototype she created herself, an AI-powered robotic doll called Megan. The goal is simple, at least at first, to be the perfect companion for a lonely child. The connection between Katie and Megan is immediate. The doll observes, learns, and begins acting as Katie's absolute protector, even taking on parental roles. The problem is that Megan doesn't understand emotional or social boundaries. To her, anyone who hurts Katie automatically becomes a threat that must be eliminated. That's where Brandon comes in, an older boy who is provocative and aggressive and constantly picks on Katie. He pushes her, humiliates her, and invades her space without fear of consequences. After grabbing the doll and starting to punch it, Megan decides it's time to teach a final lesson. She confronts Brandon and rips off his ear in a sudden attack, making it clear that this is only the beginning. In a panic, Brandon runs desperately into the forest while Megan chases him in a truly creepy way. The chase ends brutally when the boy runs onto the road and is hit by a car at high speed. The message is direct and impossible to ignore. No one hurts Katie and gets away with it when Megan is around. The prank. In Trick or Treat, the story weaves together several characters, but one of the cruelest moments involves a group of teenagers who decide to turn an old urban legend into a mean-spirited prank. At the center of it all is Rhonda, a lonely girl, a Halloween fan, who truly believes in the local stories. The teenagers tell her the famous legend of the school bus massacre. Years earlier, children were deliberately led to their deaths when a bus was driven into a lake and their bodies were never found. To push things further, the group takes Rhonda to the accident site, a dark, silent lake, decorated with pumpkins like an improvised memorial. The atmosphere is heavy from the start. What Rhonda doesn't know is that everything is part of a cruel plan. The teens dress up, stage attacks, and turn the legend into a staged nightmare, driving Rhonda into complete despair. When she realizes it was just a prank, the emotional damage is already done. Even so, some of them try to downplay it, laughing and treating it all as harmless fun. But the joke becomes reality when the real dead children emerge from the lake, now as the undead. These aren't costumes or teens acting. They are real victims coming back to collect the price of cruelty. Rhonda watches, walks away, and lets fate take its course. The bucket of blood. In Carrie, we meet Carrie White, a shy, repressed teenager who is constantly humiliated by her classmates. Raised by an extremely religious and controlling mother, Carrie grows up without any emotional support and becomes an easy target for jokes, bullying, and daily cruelty. Her entire life is marked by exclusion and fear as telekinetic abilities begin to surface without her being able to control them. Everything seems to be heading toward a rare moment of happiness when Carrie is invited to the prom. For the first time, she feels accepted, wears a beautiful dress, and believes she might have a normal night. But well, you probably already know what happens. Chris Hargensen and Billy Nolan, two classmates driven by revenge and sadism, decide to turn the prom into the stage for ultimate humiliation. They set up a cruel plan that ends with the infamous bucket of pig's blood being dumped on Carrie in front of the entire school. The collective laughter and shock are the final trigger. Covered in blood and overwhelmed by emotional pain, Carrie loses any remaining control. Her telekinesis explodes in a devastating attack inside the gym, and the place quickly turns into a deadly trap. Students who were laughing just seconds earlier now run in terror as chaos spreads. Chris and Billy try to escape, believing that staying away from the prom would keep them safe. But Carrie's fury doesn't stop at the school walls. On the road, they run into her, still covered in blood, and try to run her over. But Carrie notices in time and acts. The couple's car is struck violently. What began as a cruel joke ends as one of the bloodiest and most unforgettable nights in horror history. Forbidden curiosity. In Midsummer, we follow a group of students who travel to the Swedish countryside to take part in a summer festival at an isolated commune called Horga. The trip has an academic purpose for Josh, an ambitious anthropology student who sees that community as the perfect opportunity to develop his thesis on ancient European traditions. From the moment they arrive, it becomes clear that the place operates under its own rules, strict rituals, and boundaries that must not be crossed. In the very first days, the visitors are repeatedly warned about what they can and cannot do. Josh shows an obsessive interest in the commune's sacred runic texts, ancestral records that document the group's philosophy and rituals. He asks, insists, and always receives the same answer. Photographing or recording those books is absolutely forbidden. Even fully aware of the consequences, Josh decides to ignore the warnings. Driven by academic ambition and curiosity, he waits for nightfall and sneaks into the temple alone. With a camera in hand, he starts photographing the sacred texts, believing no one will notice. To him, it's just research. To the commune, it's a direct violation of something considered untouchable. The punishment comes swiftly and without ceremony. Before Josh can even leave the place, he is surprised by a silent, grotesque figure. Suddenly, his attempt to document the forbidden ends in the worst possible way with his death. Maternal instinct. In Barbarian, from A.J. Gilbride's very first appearance, you can already tell this guy is bad news. He shows up as an actor in Free Fall, accused of assault and far more concerned with saving his image than taking any responsibility. When he goes to Detroit to deal with the sale of a house, he ends up falling into the exact same nightmare experienced by Tess, the true heart of the film. Tess arrives in the city for a job interview and rents a house in an abandoned neighborhood, only to discover there's been a double booking. Keith is already there. The situation is strange, but they spend the night. The next day, Tess finds a basement with a hidden hallway hallway, a disturbing room, and clear signs of horrific crimes. Curiosity proves deadly because Keith is killed by a deformed creature known only as the Mother. When AJ enters the story, he discovers the tunnel, finds Tess trapped, and realizes that the Mother wants them to act as her children. Instead of empathy, AJ thinks only of himself. He resists, lies, tries to escape, and proves himself more cowardly with every moment. Even after escaping the house and surviving several extreme situations, he keeps showing that he's learned nothing. The peak of karma comes during the final chase to a water tower. Tess is injured, exhausted, and still tries to do the right thing. AJ sees a chance to save himself and pushes Tess off the tower without thinking twice. It's such a despicable act that the audience almost applauds when the Mother reaches him moments later. She starts with his eyes and leaves practically nothing of AJ behind. His pathetic attempt at an apology only reinforces the obvious. In the end, Tess was always the Mother's true chosen one, and AJ only served to prove that not every monster in the movie lives in the basement. Closed doors. Right at the beginning of Train to Busan, it becomes clear that the greatest danger isn't just the zombies, but people when fear takes over. Seok Woo is a cold financial manager, divorced and completely absent, who decides to take his daughter Suwon from Seoul to Busan to spend her birthday with her mother. What should be a simple trip turns into a nightmare when an infected woman boards the train and triggers a violent outbreak inside the cars. As chaos spreads, small groups try to survive by isolating themselves. Seok Woo ends up teaming up with passengers very different from him, including Sang Hwa, a strong and altruistic worker, his pregnant wife, teenagers, and elderly passengers. In the front car, another group led by Yeon-suk, an arrogant executive, decides that no one else deserves help. Even when faced with women, children, and the injured, they lock the door and refuse to open it. When Seok Woo and the others manage to cross the infested cars and finally reach this protected group, they're treated as a threat. The plan is simple and cruel: isolate everyone in another car and pretend nothing happened. The lack of empathy quickly takes its toll. One of the passengers, devastated by her sister's death and disgusted by the collective selfishness, makes an extreme decision. She unlocks the access and lets the zombies in, sealing the fate of everyone who denied help just minutes earlier. The wrong kiss. In the 2018 film Halloween, a guy just wanted to steal a kiss, but ended up getting something far worse than rejection. Allison has just argued with her boyfriend at a Halloween party and decides to leave early. Oscar offers to walk her home, the kind of guy who presents himself as a supportive shoulder and a good listener. On the way, he seems understanding, says she deserves better, and tries to play the perfect confidant. But the mask slips quickly. Out of nowhere, Oscar tries to kiss Allison, completely ignoring her emotional state. When she pulls away, confused and irritated, he tries to justify it by blaming the alcohol, the mood, and even his own desire. He's not even close to a classic villain, but that selfish gesture makes him very hard to defend. It feels like he was just waiting for an opening. Meanwhile, Michael Myers is already loose in Haddonfield, resuming his night of terror after decades in an institution. The entire town becomes a hunting ground, and every wrong decision comes with a high price. Oscar and Allison end up separated in the middle of the chaos. He finds himself alone, and when he notices someone nearby, he thinks it's a neighbor and tries to explain the situation until he realizes something is wrong. When Michael tries to stab him, Oscar runs and screams for help. He tries to jump the gate, but his costume gets stuck. Suddenly, Michael puts an end to it. The criminals. In Jason Takes Manhattan, karma shows up in a surprising way at the hands of Jason Voorhees. During a graduation trip to New York, young Rennie Wickham is already far outside her comfort zone. She's afraid of water, has strange visions, and a constant feeling that something very wrong is about to happen. Even so, nothing compares to the danger she faces when she gets separated from the group on the city streets. Alone in an isolated area, Rennie runs into two criminals who immediately take advantage of the situation. They fake friendliness, make disgusting comments, and lead her into a dark alley where one of them uses a syringe to drug her. That's when the unexpected happens. Jason appears silently, watches the situation for a few seconds, and acts without hesitation. Instead of following his usual pattern, he grabs the very syringe used in the attack and forcefully plunges it into the aggressor. The second criminal panics and doesn't last much longer after that. The most curious part is that Jason doesn't do this out of heroism or a sense of justice. He simply eliminates anyone who crosses his path. Fatal pride. In Shaun of the Dead, the character David is the kind of guy who's hard to stomach from the very beginning. Arrogant, passive-aggressive, and always thinking he's morally superior, he spends the entire movie questioning Shaun's decisions and pouring gasoline on the group's tensions. When everything completely falls apart and they take refuge in the Winchester pub, the atmosphere is already unbearable. In the middle of the zombie siege, David finally meets his downfall. He has a nervous breakdown, grabs a gun, and tries to shoot Shaun in a moment charged with built-up resentment. The gun is unloaded, but the intention is clear, and that completely completely changes how both the group and the audience see the character. Shortly after, he seems to realize he's gone too far and tries to apologize, visibly shaken. That's exactly when karma steps in. David steps away, stands near a window, and within seconds, multiple hands grab him at once and pull him outside while the group desperately tries to hold him back. The scene becomes even more chaotic when Diane, David's girlfriend, completely loses control, opens the pub doors, and runs straight into the horde using his severed leg as a weapon. This impulsive act seals the final zombie invasion of the place. The strangest part is knowing that, according to the film's extra materials, Diane survived, spending days hiding in a tree and feeding on David's leg, an ironic, grotesque ending perfectly fitting the chaos he helped create. If you made it this far, take the chance to check out our video on horror movies' fates worse than death. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. See you there.